Are you ready to enlarge your territory? Empire Transport is ready, willing, and able to cover all your transportation needs, both long haul and local. We service South Carolina, throughout the southeastern United States, and across the country. Sound good? In addition to freight hauling, Empire Transport also offers a 24/7 taxi service in South Carolina and the greater Charlotte area, and a mobile mechanic service where we come to you. Empire Transport, your go-to for freight hauls, taxi service, and mobile mechanic work. Learn more at empiretransport.co. Come and enlarge your territory with us. Welcome to Kingdom Now, the podcast featuring faith with an edge, as we celebrate the kingdom of God within you. I'm your host, Dr. Leanne Marino, apostle, author, and theologian, and founder of Spitfire Apostolic Ministries and all the works that go along with it. I'm excited to share this program with you as we explore the ins and outs of counterculture Christianity present as you live out the kingdom of God in your everyday life. Want to learn more? Visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. And now, our program, which features a variety of formats here just for you. Interviews, teaching and preaching proclaimed everywhere from my North Carolina studio to Sanctuary and beyond, and powerful insights here for now as we turn the world upside down everywhere we go. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. And to our listeners in all of our English-speaking countries, we say hello. We hope that whatever time of day it is when you are listening, that you're having a good one. And I welcome you to this edition of the Kingdom Now podcast. And I'm your host, Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino, here as the Spitfire, serving as the voice of counterculture Christianity, where we feature the theme of faith with an edge. And if you'd like to learn more about the world of counterculture Christianity, feel free to visit our website at kingdompowernow.org. This second part of our special edition, called Money and Stuff in the Bible, concludes the Metanoia Bible study that I taught at Sanctuary International Fellowship Tabernacle, SIFT, in Charlotte, North Carolina, in March of 2024. I hope that this episode is a blessing to you. If you'd like to learn more about Sanctuary, feel free to visit our website at welcomeinthisplace.org. Maybe that's the concept, is we have to kind of divorce the concept of what we're doing from who we're doing it for. And now I'm going to level with you. I would agree. Some of these books I've edited and some of these people I've worked for, that was not a sacred, holy feeling experience. But the ability and what we do for work is. And so you better believe I got that payment and I wrote out a thing and I put it in the bank account because I did a check. I could have done another way, but I did a check. So, because I have them and I figured why not. So I paid, that is still part of that whole cycle. I prayed for work. I didn't really care for how God answered the prayer, but it was still work. And so I made sure that that tribute went back because that's part of it. And so this is a part of a whole cycle. This is not, we keep trying to divorce things in our culture because some of these things, let's just admit, we don't want to do them. We don't really want to give to God. We want to find reasons not to give to church. We want to find reasons not to do good things. We want to keep what we want for ourselves. It's the ultimate idolatry. And we're trying to find theological justifications for it. Well, it's New Testament. Well, the New Testament was pretty much got this same backdrop on this stuff as the Old. It's really not that different. But we don't like it because it makes us uncomfortable because we don't want to do it now. And this is what I tell people. I'd have a hell of a lot more respect if they just say that. If you would just tell me you don't want to do it, I would respect that a lot more than you trying to menangle all this stuff and go that way because it's not it. So what if they didn't have crops? And so this answers the money question because people go, you didn't have to die today because it was all crops. Not quite. So it wasn't so much about not having crops as having distance involved. And there are two instances in here where they gave it as money. And actually, if it was converted into money in biblical times, it cost more. So the first we're going to look at here, this is Leviticus 27. So a tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It's holy to the Lord. So that's the first establishment there. Whoever would redeem any of their tithe must add a fifth of the value to it. So when the tithe was redeemed for cash, so in other words, they're redeeming it for money or coins, or they don't want to deal with it spoiling. And that was a valid thing. We just said they had no climate control, they had no refrigeration. So let's say that it's time to pay tithes and they can't get them there without them spoiling, because you couldn't bring something that was blemished. We couldn't do this. So, well, I did my best, God, like everybody wants to do now. If it showed up and you had a bunch of dead crops, that was not going to be accepted before God. So you want to redeem the tithe for whatever the reason. You're too far away. It's not feasible to bring it, whatever. Okay. You had to add a fifth of the value. So now we're up to 15%. Okay. So if you wanted to do that, it had to cost that. Every tithe of the herd and flock, every 10th animal that passes under the shepherd's rod will be holy to the Lord. No one may pick out the good from the bad or make any substitution. If anyone does make a substitution, both the animal and its substitute become holy and cannot be redeemed. So if you offered something, it couldn't be redeemed. So the redemption had to be done before you even offered it. So like if you said you gave your goat, okay, mom's goat, you gave the goat, two goats. Okay, mom's having two goats. We can't do a camel. That wasn't kosher. Okay. So mom's got her two goats over there, right? And so mom wants to redeem only one of them and decides that you want the other one, but you've already brought them. It's just too bad, because it cannot be redeemed once it's been offered. No take backs. Nope.
That explains Ananias
and Sapphira.
Okay, that's a lot more emphasis on. They were husband and wife who sold some property
in Acts, yeah.
But they kept part of the money for themselves, and they told the apostles, "Hey, this is all the money we got for it." And I guess because they had already promised it to God, and then they did the take back. That's what made
tribute. And so there's a whole context to that once again that we often don't pay attention to.
We think that because we don't have this context, it's like, oh, you didn't give all of your money. You didn't sell all of your possessions to God, but it's not about that. It's the intention behind it.
It's the tribute.
Trying to cheat God out of stuff.
Yep, a promise is a promise. No takebacks. So the reason why I say that they had to add to the value with the tithe in the biblical context here, this is my theory. There is not a lot of explanation for a lot of this, as I found out, but this is my personal theory. I would say that it's a convenience fee, because it probably was more awkward for the Levites now to have to go find food and buy it from somebody than if you're just bringing it.
Like the credit card charge.
Right. So like instead of the liquidating crops and the offering of the cash, they added it to the tithe, so it was like a convenience fee. Like, hey, you're using PayPal, I'm charging you a 3% fee because I have to pay 3% fee. So it's that would be the context, that now somebody else probably has to get involved and has to go take something and go find what they're not bringing. So that's the explanation for that. Now, this is Deuteronomy 14. And this passage is a little bit different. And this actually we're going to talk about specifically a little bit later. But if that place is too distant and you have been blessed by the Lord your God and cannot carry your tithe, because the place where the Lord will choose to put his name is so far away. So it's basically wherever it was set up was too far. Okay. Then exchange your tithe for silver and take the silver with you and go to the place your Lord will choose. Use the silver to buy whatever you like, cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wish. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. And do not neglect the Levites living in your towns, for they have no allotment or inheritance of your own. So it was a little bit differently done here, but there's a different context to this that we will talk about shortly. But in other words, whether it was money or crops, whatever was required had to find its way where it had to go. We couldn't just say, oh, I can't do it. So how much to give? It's not what you think. So it's both more and less than what we think. So according to various accounts, and I read a whole bunch, observant Jews who followed the law in Old Testament times gave somewhere between 22% and 33% of their income away.
Wow.
So everyone fusses over 10%. Right. I mean, it could be a lot worse. Between tithes, because there was actually more than one tithe, which we will talk about. And it's like I say, I don't know that the second ones are really that much of an applicable thing for us now, but we will talk about those. Offering sacrifices, offering to the poor. People gave away an awful lot of what they had. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I'm going to venture that probably the majority of them didn't do it. That noticed that there was an awful lot of attempt to get out of stuff, and they wanted to go offer to their pagan gods, and they wanted to go do their thing because it seemed more advantageous than, hey, we have to be good and give to poor people, and hey, we have to be, do the right thing. How dare God expect that of us? And if it sounds like it's a lot, it was, but God promised that they would always have enough. Basically, I see it like this. God gave his all, and he asked us for our all. Now, I don't think that that means we have to give away every single dime that we have. I have heard of crazy people when I was in more of the oneness churches that lived on 10% and gave away 90. I don't think that any of that is really the way that it's supposed to be. And yes, and they live just like you're talking about. You're sitting there and shaking your head. They didn't do nothing, wore rags, that whole type of thing. I don't think that we have to give to the point of nothingness. This is not Buddhism. But we do need to give what we promise. And we need to give in accordance with what we have. And I think that the lesson of Old Testament giving is that it's income-based, that everybody can find something to give. I take real issue with people who go, well, it's expensive now. Well, everybody thought it was expensive in their day too. The idea of expensiveness is not, proportionate to how much it is now. Do I agree that things are outrageous? Of course. I mean, that's not even a question. But everybody always thinks that everything is expensive. I mean, you thought when you were a kid that getting $2 or $3 was a lot of money, because if we judge by inflation back then, it was a lot. So, that's kind of the way that we put it. And so in modern times, I feel like we argue against giving because we dispute the validity of the form rather than seeing the essence. So I believe that the first sin was covetousness. And I know that people argue that and look at me funny and think I'm annoying. No, was Adam and Eve. You need to go back a generation. Was covetousness because they basically desired to have something that wasn't for them to have. So the basic sin of humanity, the original sin, was covetousness. It was wanting to be like God, or wanting to be in that place, or wanting something that was not for them to have. So all of these different things are addressing that basic nature for covetousness. And if we think about that concept, whether it's stealing or it's money or people thinking that they're more than they are, or all of this stuff kind of goes back to that in one form or another. We're all trying to sit on the throne and ascend to the heights. And we don't like that, and that's uncomfortable, and that's not maybe what we want to hear, but it's true. But I don't think that God is as much about the amounts as the way that we give. But let's get real, because an awful lot of people want a way around giving so it doesn't cost us anything. And we even do this in cultures. So I did a little bit of research, and it is not up there. So everybody for a couple of weeks was on Facebook talking about Taylor Swift giving money for something. I don't remember what. I don't really care. It was some feeding program or something. And people were saying that because she did that, and me in bad theology, she did that she's a better Christian than Christians because she gave a large amount of money. Now, let's just start here. She didn't give it in faith. She's a small, rich celebrity. And I don't care who hears me say that. I'm not criticizing her as an artist. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Giving from their wealth. Oh, no, this person gave all they had. Giving from her wealth.
And that's a good point. So this is what I found out. This is not the definition of faith, and this was not a sacrifice. It's like Oprah on the Rock getting on the internet asking people for money for Hawaii. And I was just sitting there going, y'all could rebuild it yourselves and have money left over, and you're asking me for money. Go sit down somewhere. But I
eat cereal for dinner,
So I couldn't get an exact amount of money. But it's somewhere around $5 million. That's important. $5 million for a bunch of different causes. And she did not give equally to all of them. Like, for example, y'all, about all this girl power, you gave $100,000 to some women's thing, and you give, $1 million for something else that doesn't have anything to do with that. So then I kind of questioned that. She's worth $1.1 billion. $5 million is not even a tithe. It's not.
That's 5%, isn't it?
About, yeah. I mean,
so generous. Love it.
That's like,
cool.
And I'm going, you could give away $1 billion and still have money left. More money than any of us will probably ever see in our lifetime. You should give. You should have given more. You could fund our government. Some of these people by themselves could get us out of debt. Now they're talking about another government shutdown, how they passed some bill. Yeah, well, they passed the bill so it won't shut down, but nobody can agree on anything. And I'm going in the back of my mind, and this is what bothered me, that, what are they going to do? They're going to cut off your Social Security, and they're going to cut off people's Medicaid, Medicare, probably all of it. So whichever one it is. They're going to not give back.
Somewhere in a foreign country with no money.
They're going to they're going to return income taxes. And she's out there with $5 million, and we all think that she's a better Christian. Excuse me. I mean, maybe this is just, kind of me, but. Right. She probably don't pay taxes.
Reminds me of corporations that, like, you go to Harris Teeter or something, like, you want to donate to this?
No.
And you're just like, oh, so you can use it as tax write-off? No.
No, you give in my name. How about we do that? You got $1 billion. It's like everybody just shut up kind of thing.
I'm paying like 20% more at the grocery store these days.
Right. You take that portion. You take my 20% and you give it to charity. How about we do that?
And now Harris Teeter has a new policy right up on the little machine. They're charging you now
for cash back.
If you want $20 back,
if you want your own money. Now think about that. Think about the ATM concept. If you want your own money. Okay. Oh, they don't do it at all?
Well, at least the one that I go to.
Oh. Interesting.
So, I mean, it's okay if I could, if you just come in the store and you want to do it, but if you're buying groceries, $20 over,
Isn't this fun? Right. And meanwhile, someone somewhere has $1.1 billion by themselves. Yeah. So basically, if we want God to bless us, we have to give. We can't receive without giving. It's not the way that it works. And technically, if we're going to be New Testament, the Old Testament system is not really enough. Now, I'm not going to fault anybody for following it. I think it's a good measure. I think that it's a good way to do it, and I'll tell you what I do in a little bit. So when money trips us up, because you know what it absolutely positively does. So purchasing idols and pursuing idols costs money. That calf that they made was gold, and all of them took off their earrings and took off their rings and took out their nose rings, because it does specifically state that, and took all the little money that they had and they melted it all down. And where we spend our money indicates our priorities. So, nope. You're just going to have a pretty little shiny statue. I mean, Yeah. So the same concept is, it's the same concept here, that they pay tribute to these gods by doing all that. So just like we're saying you paid with a tithe, They're doing the same thing with the foreign idols. They're offering coins and food. And it benefits us to consider our idols today and recognize that financial ways take us away from God. So it's also good to be financially smart. And what I mean by that is we don't want to be paying the IRS $50 billion in interest, because that's all lost money. That's not just money that we don't have to go buy stuff we might want to buy or need. It also takes it away from God, in that kind of context. So answers for those who don't want to give, because we all know that's a lot of people. So God doesn't need my money. Well, if you understand the concept of tribute, it's really not about needing, it's that you need to give. It's a mindset. So, if you don't want us to ask, if you're sick of preachers asking for money, then give yourself. Then we don't have to. I mean, I'm very much about that. I remember hearing, I think it was Joyce Meyer who said, so you're all tired of me getting up here asking for money. She says, well, did you ever consider that maybe I don't want to do it either? You believe in these programs and you believe in this stuff, then give to it. Then, stop patting me on the back and thinking that God will take care of it. It's not that deep. Tithing is only for the Old Testament. Well, Jesus says it's correct to tithe in Matthew 23:23, where he's talking to the Pharisees, you correct in doing the former and not in neglecting the latter. So you still have to do the right thing. It's not we're not buying off God, but it's concept there. Pastors take money for ourselves. That's just so funny. So the majority of pastors pursue other jobs outside of ministry. Yeah, well, but it's the same type of concept. I mean, it's a mood for the moment. So I don't have any money to give. Yeah, sure you do. God knows my heart, and yeah, that's why giving is in your best interest, because your heart is not enough. So churches, I can't pay the bills with your heart. So churches shouldn't ask for money. Well, your mom, your boyfriend, your brother, your friend, everybody else asks for money, and you don't tell them not to do it. So, I mean, hey, but I will also say for every group that we belong to in the world, every group that you belong to, it's understood that you pay a membership fee. Yeah. Okay, so I don't understand why we think God should rain money out of the sky for this. It doesn't fit the greater picture of part of belonging to culture. It just doesn't work like that. So let's talk a little bit about the specific forms, and this will move very, very quickly. So tithing. So biblical tithing. So a tithe is a 10% or 1/10 of something paid in contribution. And basically, tithing was an ancient form of taxation. So, like, for example, it says that Abram gave Melchizedek a tithe on everything. He was the king of Salem, or he was the king somewhere. I think it was Salem. So that was a tax. That was him basically paying tribute. Pretty much. I mean, we pay about 30% if you really start to calculate it all out. So it's a way that we give for all the fuss that people make over it, and for all the fuss that they make over a term because they're obnoxious. So it serves all the same purpose as taxation to a government. That's just keeping things functioning. That's just keeping us going. And Jesus endorsed that tithing should not be neglected. And while it might be voluntary now, and so, I mean, it's not law, like you're not going to lose your salvation if you don't tithe. It's not that kind of a thing. It doesn't mean that it's not a good idea or a purposeful way to handle giving. I think it's very, very purposeful. I think it's very functional. It's easy. We don't have to calculate a whole bunch of stuff. It's just 10%. It is not a requirement of salvation. And I don't think that it's ever been assumed to be that. But it is a form of honor with substance, and it is part of a tribute. So God encourages us to test him with our tithes. That's in Malachi 3:10. In other words, give the 10% and see that God will bless it. And I don't believe that we're cursed if we don't do it. But as with any other opportunity, we can be blessed if we do it, because God honors giving. So we should always see ourselves as good stewards with our resources, and tithing is an example of such. And I don't believe that it's limited necessarily to money all the time like that. It's the only way that we can give, but I definitely think that there is a context to it in there. So it was found in several different cultures. It was found all throughout the ancient world. Like we say, it's taxation. And it was also used in different ancient spiritual systems because, once again, it was a good way for everybody to throw something in the pot and contribute to keep stuff going. And it does predate the law, like we were talking about. So it has to be functional. So we can't keep sanctuary running with services and with resources with a pile of wheat sheaves. It's a nice idea, and I know not with that attitude. Sheaves. Like, you've never heard the song Bringing in the Sheaves? Maybe that's a white song. It probably is, but yeah. Like the sheaf, it's like the whole sheave, SHEAV. The whole thing, the whole piece. It's like a sheave. Yeah, like Ulster. Yeah. Okay. And so this is an example of where they might not have talked about tithing by name, but he is talking about the same system. So this is in a pagan nation. I'm going to read it. It's in a pagan culture. And he's talking about tithings, which means they all understood it. Don't you know that those who serve in the temple get their food from the temple, and that those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. So he's talking about the same concept there. So there were actually 3 different types of tithes. So there was the first tithe that was given annually, and so that's pretty much the concept that we do now. That's basically the idea that we use today, would be a rough model of this. Because we don't have annual crops, we tithe on paychecks, or we do it monthly, we do it when we get paid. But it was given in the form of grain, cattle, fruit, etc., on everything. So everything that was there got tithed. If one gave in the form of money, the value was typically 12% versus 10, and then we had the example of 15% versus 10 if it was converted or was redeemed. And in turn, the Levites also tithed, giving to the high priest. So the high priest got 1% basically of everybody in Israel, and then the Levites also tithed. So like when people go, well, we don't have to give, we're leaders. Yes, we do. So it was what they would call a mitzvah or a commandment. Yeah, which means son of the commandment and daughter of the commandment.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. No, it's the same meaning.
I'm also thinking mikvah.
I think you're thinking of the pool of water, the mikvah. Okay, that's different word, not mitzvah. That's mikvah. No Z. Okay. So then there was a second tithe. Now, whether or not this was actually a thing is a little bit debatable, or if it was just God reiterating the tithe on again. But it does appear that there was a second tithe in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of 7-year cycles. So remember, that's the 7-year cycle with the land and the economy and all that. Because it's very specific, it really isn't practical now or obligatory now, but it was given after the obligatory tithe for the Levites. So this is like another one. And it was only on specific items, which is why people aren't really sure if it was a thing or not. I have a theory on that. It was on grain, wine, and olive oil. Those were the 3 things that it was on. Right. And I'm also going to say that I think that it might have had something to do with one of 2 things. It either had to do with the commonality of the items, like in other words, they had an overabundance of these things. So it was like a tithe on top of a tithe. In other words, you've got surplus or you've got more than expected. And it might have something to do with the harvesting in that thing, like that the wheat grew and then it's the next year. And it's on wine and on olive oil. So it might have also had something to do with the production of those things. Like, for example, you had your grape harvest and you had your olive oil harvest, you had the olives, but then you had to convert it. And so it might have, right. It might have had something to do with that. It might have, like when these things were produced, or it also might have had to do with their value, that because these were primary things that were used in ceremonies and their commonality within the ceremonies, and so they had a higher value. It might have been all of it. It might have been none of it. Nobody really has any explanation. I tried to read more about it, but there's not a lot about it. And there's more of a debate as to whether or not it was a thing. And it wasn't specific goods, so there was the option to redeem the tithe and then add a fifth to the value. So then it was 15% versus 10. And they were then used for ordinary use. So the money had to be used for specific purposes. And this was that tithe that we read about where it said, hey, if you can't get there in time, go and take it and convert it to silver, buy the food, remember the Levites, take care of it, and observe the tithe that way, which that would have been different from the first tithe, because if nobody was doing the first tithe, the Levites couldn't have lived. So this was like some sort of a special thing that like was done. And like we say, I was not able to find a whole lot out about it, but that would be my theory. And because it's on such specific things, I mean, none of you are raising wheat or grain or olive oil or, any of that. It's not really something that applies now, unless we had an olive oil distributor. Then they could do second tithe. I mean, I wouldn't stop them. So then there was the third tithe, which is kind of a different context. So this was only done the third year and the sixth year. So notice that the second tithe was done on the other years, and then this was only done third and sixth. So it's very specific, and it's different a little bit from alms. It's kind of like alms, but not alms. It would be like we would take a special collection and we would give it to, name a group. Okay, yeah, the Salvation Army. I was going to say that would actually probably apply because they traditionally give for the homeless shelters or something like that. It's what they call the poor man's tithe. So it was 10% of produce given to both the Levites and the poor. So out of that 10%, the Levites got some and the poor got some. Notice that every single time, though, the Levites were always kind of included. Now, the Levites received the tithe because they didn't have a land inheritance, and that's all a whole other thing that we're not going to get into here, but it was only on crops grown in Israel, and in the 7th year, also in Jordan and in Egypt. So keeping track of some of this is a little bit challenging. You kind of need a chart, but it was only on crops that were in Israel. So like, for example, if they were in Rome, like they were in Greece or they were in Turkey, they wouldn't have done it. So I don't even know, like by the time we get to the New Testament, how common this particular tithe was. But most would say they don't really do this today. You would just give charity, would kind of be the context of that. So then you've got what they call first fruits, which if you've ever studied Pentecost, you've probably heard about. So first fruits was basically a festival, also called the Festival of Weeks. It was an annual harvest festival that was 7 weeks after Passover, so 7 complete weeks. So it's when Pentecost was. So that's what everybody was there to do. They were going to offer first fruits. That's why everyone was there. And it required giving the first and best portion of any harvest to the Lord. And this is separate from tithes. I'm not exactly even sure what the amount is because I've never really read anything that specific, but this is not tithes. In other words, the first of everything went to God, 10% of everything went to God. You can see where this becomes 33% of everybody's income. And it was supposed to be tribute. Once again, it was obedience. It demonstrated reverence, and it gave God what was first rather than what was left over. And no other crops could be harvested until they all gave this. So that even took a lot of time within Israel.
So it was the first harvest.
Basically. Okay. Yep. First harvest. And so they gave it on grain, olive oil, new wine, honey, sheep's wool, fruit, herds, and flocks. Olive oil was a big one. And then there was the specific items, the grain, wine, and olive oil. So they even gave of that a couple different times. And how would this apply today? Well, you give it, like I say, it's a special offering, like from a tax return, or like, let's say you get a new job and you want to give an offering out of your first paycheck that's special, that's beyond a tithe. That would be that. Or maybe like gifting equipment, like you buy something for the church, that would kind of be that type of context. It's supposed to cost us something. That's the concept of first fruits. Almsgiving is basically giving to the poor, and there isn't really any special amount of money, but we are told that we shouldn't give to charity with fanfare or publicly or with a trumpet blast behind us. The Bible does not say we should consider the poor above the rich, nor does it say we should consider the rich above the poor. I've been reading that in the law, and I find that kind of interesting. And what I also kind of put in here is, remember that there are more causes than what might be common or popular today. And what I mean by that, it's not just about homeless people, or it's not just about breast cancer research, or it's not just about Relay for Life. And I'm not saying that we can't do that, but there is also today what we call overfunding, which basically means that the majority of charities that people give, Children's Miracle Network, Susan Komen, I mean, these are well-known facts. This is not a secret. They're not giving your money to breast cancer research or to children. They're giving it to fund salaries and expensive bonuses and rental properties on Fifth Avenue in New York City. It's not going to the cause because they're overfunded. They have more money than they really do need. But how would we give alms today? So a dry good pantry, or like when we do blessing bags, those are alms. We're taking all that money, and the money that we buy the stuff with is from tithes and offerings, and we purchase the things and then we hand them out to people. And so there's an example of almsgiving. Or giving used clothing to charity. If it doesn't fit or you don't like it, don't keep it. Volunteering for a program. So giving leftover change, like people give to HRC, or, do you want to round it up? Those would be things that would do that. An extended program and advocacy for marginalized groups, domestic violence, clean water. There's a lot of ways that we can kind of give in that vein. So then there's offering. Sometimes people call it seed. I'm kind of apt to not call it that.
A lot by prosperity gospel preachers.
That it's from the parable of the sower, and I feel it's kind of out of context. But they believe that whatever you sow with intent, you get back 100-fold. And I'm not going to say that God doesn't give back to us for giving. I'm not saying that that's not a thing. The Bible does say God loves a cheerful giver, but we need a perspective. Tribute is not a transaction. Not a divine transaction. So an offering would be not a specified amount, but any giving that's above and beyond what might be expected. So anytime we give, even if it's the amount of a tithe, if more or less, if it's given to the Lord, then we're making an offering. So we should give cheerfully, without persuasion, without expectation. We do know God will take care of us if we take care of him, and we should give regularly. I mean, I've been in churches where people make change at the offering plate. Oh no, I mean like people are up there like counting out dollar bills and for 20 minutes. Or, where they're trying to raise another $20 or $50 and they're trying to raise another 20 or 50 and they're like, all right, we need another $20. Who's going to give? And we all sit there until they got their $20. So, oh God.
Praise the Lord.
Wow. Oh, it was a TV show.
Yeah, the Bernie Mac show, they had an episode where he was at church and the pastor wouldn't let anybody leave until like a certain amount of people got saved. So that he could just go home, he went up, but then they had like a new members class right after that. So he still couldn't leave.
So this is how I give. This is not a rule. We're not telling everybody that they have to do it. I want to make that really clear. We're not saying if you don't do it, you're not coming to church anymore. This is not a cult. Be quiet, Nick.
It's not. It doesn't meet the criteria.
It doesn't meet the criteria. Shut up, Nick. So, we're live. Don't give people bad ideas. Okay. how I give. So I kind of use an extended tithe principle for giving. All right. So I tithe on all my gross income first before I do or I pay anything else. I pay tithes. Now, that's how I do it. I don't feel that we're required to pay on net income because we're not getting the net income. And, it says give to Caesar what's Caesar. So if we're giving, they're already taking out our taxes. I don't think we have to tithe on that. That's my opinion. I don't feel that we have to do that. I don't like people. And I'm having a whole thought about that. So an annual first fruits I typically give is an offering that can come in many ways. I usually get equipment or I usually get something. So once a year, I try to make an offering out of something. And I'm not going to lie, it's not always first. It's not always in January, but it's still that type of concept. And I use 10% across the board for giving goods. So the example I suggested that we... Right. So we talk about going in on a membership. So I say 10% of anything means that I have to give 10% away. So if I buy 10 pairs of shoes, I have to at least give one away. I'm not buying 10 pairs of shoes a year. Let me clarify that. But no, I would actually probably still give away another pair. Well, no, because
just the insult.
Now that would be a stingy American way to do things. But that's just an example of that. Or like we say, every 10th roll of toilet paper goes to the dry goods pantry or goes for something else or, something of that nature. So if I have to at least give away one thing for every 10. And that's my own kind of way of doing it. And anything else as his ability arises. So that's kind of the example that I would use for that. And now everybody does not have to do that. It's just an easy way to do it. It's a nice way to think about it, as everybody's shocked because they haven't given away anything in years. So, no, I just kind of keep track in my mind. I would also say that with me, and I don't like to use the term transactional, but it's more transactional, like I go through and I clean out. And so actually the past couple of years, I've probably given away more than I've actually brought in, but that's okay with too much stuff. It's like, I really was thinking I should adopt the tithe thing with books too. Like at least every 10, at least one goes out, but I need to do way more than just giving away one nowadays. Yeah, I need that 30%. Yeah. I need to be giving away one every 3. That sounds about right. Pretty much. Oh, well, it's like I actually went for a little while where I didn't have as many that I was giving away. And now I've been trying to find a devotional book. And so I try to read all these ones. And now there's a whole bunch of them in the box. So maybe I gave away 10 now because I was trying to find something and I went, all right, these are not of any value. So it's, it somehow kind of balances out.
Thank you for joining us on Kingdom Now. I pray it proves to be a blessing in your life. To learn more about this work, ask a question, submit feedback or a topic suggestion, advertise on air, or donate to this work, visit my website, which contains essential information and links for other points of contact around the web at kingdompowernow.org. Also, if you are in our area and would like to visit Sanctuary International Fellowship Tabernacle SIFT, visit welcomeinThisPlace.org. Until next time, this is Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino reminding you that the kingdom of God is within you, and that means the kingdom is now.